Hello, everybody, and welcome back to 50 Shades of Tay. I'm Taylor Gonzalez, and my guest today is an incredible composer. You guys know his work on Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, and Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey 2, and his upcoming movie, The Death of Snow White. He did a gorgeous score that we're going to talk about. It's coming out April 18th. You guys have to keep an eye out for this film because it's a lot of fun. But Andrew Scott Bell, how are you doing today?
I'm doing so well, thank you. And you were at the premiere of this film last Friday, this past Friday in Hollywood, at the legendary oh my God, what's it called? Harmony Gold, the legendary Harmony Gold Theater, where lots of films have premiered, including the recent remake of The Color Purple.
Ooh.
They've had lots of premieres there because it's a great space to have a private event
Mhm.
and do a Q&A, with the stage and really nice lighting. So I'm so glad that you were able to come and do the Q&A. You did such a great job.
Oh, thank you so much. That was such a fun night. Like I haven't stopped thinking about it since it was just such a cool occasion and to get to be there, especially like I mentioned at the beginning of the Q&A, like not only did we have a lot of the talented cast and crew on stage, but then in the audience there were so many people, like costume makers and
Hmm.
makeup artists and production assistants. There were so many people in the audience that day, so it was just really special to be there and celebrate with everyone because I know how much hard work goes into making a film like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the way it is with a lot of premieres that are, I mean, we invited some press. I think we had like 15 to 20 or maybe 30. I can't remember. I mean, I'm not in charge of this stuff. I just write the music. But I remember the director saying, I think like 30 of the seats were for press. But then most of it was cast and crew and family members of people who worked on this picture just to come and celebrate, see it in the theater for the first time. A lot of those people, if you work on set, I work in post production, which means that I see the movie as it's being finished, right? I'm writing the music to a fully finished edited picture, right? It's not completely finished in terms of sound design and sound effects and some of the visual effects and stuff, but I'm looking at a pretty finished film. So there's not a lot of surprise for me when I go to these premieres because I finished sometimes like for Snow White, I finished working on it like a week and a half before the premiere, so it's still fresh in my mind. But if you worked on this on set and they filmed in August, I think mostly
Mhm.
August and September, you have no idea what to expect. You
Right.
don't you don't even know if you're like an extra. You don't even know if your scenes have made it. You're showing up and seeing like how does it look? What does it feel like? Because all your memory is just being there on set. You have no idea. So I think it's really fun for cast and crew and people who worked on set. What's called production um, to come and see the movie for the first time with everything all finished. It's really cool.
For people who haven't had a chance yet to check out the trailer, how would you describe this version of Snow White?
I mean, I know that it's kind of, the thing about genres, I always say this about music. There's no such thing as genres. There's only music that you like and music that you don't like, and that's the only thing that matters. Genres just help categorize films. So I think for the lack of like nuance, I think we're calling it a horror retelling, but in my mind, it's more of like a dark fantasy. It's more of
Yeah.
like a rated R fairy tale. So there's not a lot, like it's not a slasher. It's not even a horror in the way that there's like a monster. It is just kind of, for the most part, I mean, there's embellishments and slight tweaks to the story, but it's a retelling of the original Brothers Grimm tale with a ton of blood, a ton of gore, a ton of violence, and great action fight sequences. And it's definitely rated R, for adults only. So I think that's refreshing to people, not only because where people have been clamoring for like an adult versions of these fairy tales that are originally very dark. Even the Brothers Grimm, when they wrote them down, because a lot of these fairy tales were told, um, like over the fire, right?
Right.
Like from person to person and spread around audibly. Can't remember, what that's called, but just like verbal storytelling. And then the Brothers Grimm wrote down the version that they heard. They even softened a lot of their fairy tales that they wrote down and tweaked some of the things to make it more acceptable, even for audiences back then. So it's pretty gory. I think people are gonna love it, and I
Yeah.
think people have been kind of clamoring for Like I love the slasher version. We just had like a Popeye movie that some of my friends worked on, Popeye the Slayer Man.
Yeah.
Um, but I've seen a lot of comments and stuff and people saying like, I want a horror version of this, but why can't um, the main character be like a good guy or something like that? And
Mhm.
I think this kind of fits what a lot of people are asking for, which is does Snow White have to be the slasher in a Snow White horror movie, if that makes sense?
Mm. Yeah, no, and
and
I think
and and for like to say like I love uh because when it works. Like I
mhm,
love the idea of Popeye being a slasher. I love the
yeah,
idea of Winnie the Pooh being a slasher. Like
mhm.
that is fun in its own way. This is very different in its own way too.
Yeah, and I think dark fantasy is exactly how I would describe it too, because it's a mix of fantasy with some horror elements, but it's not I think it's not what people are expecting, and I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised when they go into this. I loved it. I'm telling you right now, I thought it was great and I loved a lot of the decisions. And I one thing I did not expect was there was a lot of really good humor throughout it. Like the
Yeah.
friends on both sides of the Prince and Snow White, like they had some funny friend groups, and I was just like, wow, this is like a good mix of a lot of different elements, and it made for a really fun story.
Yeah, the dwarf character, the characters, the dwarfs, they are very funny, and the little
Mhm.
people actors who played them are just nailed it right down, right in the right tone of like humor, but then also you just kind of like fall in love with them as characters. So yeah, it's really, really, I think it does have some great comedy, and as I'm working on these pictures, like I can never tell. I can kind of get a sense of like when scares are gonna be
Oh,
effective, like, ooh, that's gonna be a good scare. But
mm,
I'm not as good at knowing when like jokes are going to land. So it was really nice at the premiere to hear people laughing.
yeah,
Because it wasn't just it. There's a difference between if you go to a lot of these premieres and it's filled with the audience is filled with people who worked on the picture, you often hear people laughing because it's like their friend up there
right.
or something. But this felt different to me, which was nice that like they were like laughing at the jokes.
Yeah,
So that was really cool.
yes. I have to show you, by the way, what I am drinking out of today in
Oh,
honor
look
of
at
the death of
that.
Snow
That's
White.
so great. That's so cool.
Oh my gosh. Well, I love the score in this film. I thought it was so great, so different from what I'm used to from you. What would you say were some of the inspirations when crafting this score?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. It is very different from other scores that I know that I've worked on. I haven't really had the chance to do a fantasy film like this. I've worked in adventure and like I've worked in some like family films that were very different than my horror films, but I've never had the opportunity to work on like a fantasy with like, you know, fantastical creatures and magic and stuff like that. So this was very rewarding for me to kind of spread my wings and try some new stuff. I tried my best to go back to some of my classical roots in undergrad, where I went to school at Christopher Newport University in Virginia, where I majored in classical composition and orchestration, and I studied all of the greats. So I went back to like Ravel. Um, I always listen to a lot of Holst, but I tried to listen to a lot of Holst. He has a really great collection of works called The Planets that I think everyone should. If you love film scores, you should listen to The Planets by Gustav Holst because you will hear in that how much it has influenced film music in our modern era. And I also listened to a composer named Johann de Mej, who wrote before there was any talk of movies, before um, Peter Jackson got his hands on Lord of the Rings books. Johann de Mej had written a symphony inspired by the books of the Lord of the Rings. And the reason I remembered and thought to listen to that is because we played, my high school wind ensemble played, I think, the first movement, which is called Gandalf, for the wind band. So I was aware of that and thinking, what a great reference that could be for me to think of outside of the world of film music, what can I kind of listen to and get inspired by? But then, just like anything else, I had that initial seed of an idea when I first met Jason, the director. My manager introduced me to him, and we had a Zoom call. And that first little seed of an idea, before I listened to Ravel, before I listened to Johann de Mage and Gustav Holst and all the stuff that I was trying to craft as my inspiration, um, I pitched myself to Jason Brooks, the director, as and I don't normally do this, but I said to him, "What do you think if I were to say I would like to write a Braveheart horror score?" And he was just so tickled by that. He was like, "Oh, that sounds awesome." So there's bagpipes and tin whistles, Irish tin whistles, and um, like accordions, and there's all sorts of harps. What's it called? The hammered dulcimers and harps and all of this Celtic Irish influence, in addition to like Germanic influence and really instruments from all over the world. So yeah, I don't know. I could probably talk forever about it, but
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I loved all the different instruments and the way it all blended together. What was your favorite scene to score? And then after you tell me yours, I'll tell you what my favorite scene with the score was without spoiling anything.
okay. That's really. I think I had the most fun. I remember a moment. I'm always scoring. Like I don't always start at the most important scene. Like I usually don't start at the beginning. I usually don't start at the end or at any like big moment throughout the picture. I normally start in like a smaller, like I don't wouldn't like every scene is important in a film, but like there are some scenes that are more pivotal to the plot than others, and those I don't like to start with, and I don't like to end with them. I like to go with like, maybe like the middle scene of dialogue between the big action set pieces or something to kind of get warmed up and then do all the important stuff in the middle of my timeline and then at the end finishing up with like smaller more dialogue scenes again that aren't as musically driven, right? But in this picture, for whatever reason, same with Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey 1, I started right at the top of the picture, like right at the intro, and I did the full 9 minute introduction to the scene. And I think it's because I had written all these themes prior to writing to the film that I just wanted to like, play with all the themes that I had already written. And that opening sequence is such a great opportunity because it's bouncing between the witch and Snow White and Snow White's parents and the snow theme and then the Snow White lullaby and then the dwarf theme and like there's all this like it's kind of a collage of all the themes you're about to hear for the rest of the picture. So that I started with that, but it wasn't my favorite, and it wasn't when it like cracked for me. When it really cracked for me was like maybe a week later. I did a scene where it's a very short little scene where the dwarfs and the prince decide they're going to go and save Snow White, and one of the dwarfs is like, or the prince is like, "What's the plan?" And the dwarf is like, one of the characters is like, "We're gonna go save her. What do you mean?" And he's like, "No, but what's the plan?" And he's like, "The plan is to go save her." And it's this really funny moment that ends with them all putting their hands together and going like, "Let's go, Snow White." And in that like triumphant moment of the music when they put their hands together and go and it cuts to the next scene, but in that little triumphant moment, like I had this like chill through me as I was writing the music, like this is fun.
Yeah.
I'm having so much fun writing for this like fantasy adventure that I don't ever I have not yet had an opportunity to do. So I think that's probably the answer, is that like that little moment where they all put their hands together and like they and it comes right after a moment of comedy. Like I think sometimes comedy primes that excitement, you know? Um, so I think that's my answer. And even though it's really small, that's where I was like, this is, and I just, since then, for the rest of the picture, I was just like having a blast, like, kind of swinging for the fences and writing some bold new stuff for me. So,
Oh, so cool. Okay, so my favorite scene that you scored, I have to be very careful though. It's like the very end of the film, there's a dance. That's all I'll say. And I just thought the visuals along with the score that you put there, it was just a really emotional, beautiful scene. So I think when people watch the film and they see this, they will know exactly what I'm talking about. But you
oh,
did such a
yeah.
beautiful job with the music there.
Thank you. That's actually, that theme is the first piece of music I wrote for the movie.
Oh, wow.
Um, and I posted it way down, like, on my Instagram story, or way down on my Instagram feed, like a long time ago. And that's the first bit of music I wrote, and it's the love theme between the
Mhm.
prince and Snow White. because
Oh,
everyone has
so
like
good.
their own kind of theme, but then there's like relationship themes. Like Snow White has her kind of Snow White lullaby, which is played throughout the whole movie, and it's connected to like the family, like monarchy type, like tartan theme, or like every you know when I say tartan, I mean like family crest or something. Like, I think of it as like the family crest
Mm,
theme. So it's connected to the Snow White lullaby, but then Snow White also has a bit of her, like the left hand piano of her lullaby is like becomes the theme that is the relationship with her and her mother, and that I once called the snow theme because it happens in the beginning of the movie while she's giving birth and she looks out the window and she's like, look at the snow, it's a million tiny stars falling from the sky, it's really and that music is playing there, and you hear it when Snow White talks about her mother, or
mhm.
when someone's telling her about her mother. So yeah, all the themes are connected, and everyone, like the prince has his own theme, and Snow White has her own theme, but then they have a theme for their relationship, their romance together, and so that theme you're talking about is the romance theme for Snow and the prince.
Oh, loved it so much.
Thank you.
Um, what was the trickiest scene to score? Whether you just didn't know what kind of emotion you wanted to put into the music, or you didn't know how to fit in, the type of instrument you wanted. And what do you do when you do get stuck? Like if you get, I guess, kind of like a writer's block when scoring, do you go for a walk? Do you, just take a break from it and walk away and then come back to it refreshed later? How do you handle that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the trickiest part of scoring this picture is also one of the things I love about it. In watching it, but it was definitely challenging, was that like most of the battle scenes have little cut moments of comedy that I had to bounce between. Normally, when I'm like, doing a chase scene in a horror film or a fight scene in an action film, or, whatever, there's like action going on. It normally stays pretty much with the action. In my career, I know that it's normal to have jokes powdered throughout, but that was the first time in my career where like I'd be like the dwarfs would be like fighting and it would be huge and huge and huge, and then we would cut to like the brothers and they would be standing there like cracking jokes, and it was really tough to go like really big, really
Mhm.
loud, and then dip for a comedic line, and then get back into the action when it cuts away from the brothers, and then it comes back and the dwarves do something funny in their fight choreography that needs a little bit of a comedic booms, and then it bounces back to action, and so that jumping back and forth was a challenge for me. But once I kind of found the rhythm of how that was going to play in this picture, it became, as I did it more, because there's multiple fight scenes, like really great fight scenes, and as I did it more, it became like kind of second nature to like bounce into the comedic moments, pause for a bit, bounce back in a way that didn't feel jolting. So that was the challenge. And in terms of writer's block, when I'm writing and I just need to, and I feel like I'm getting stuck, I usually get stuck like in a specific moment of a scene. And so what I'll do is I'll just kind of like hit pause on that section and go write the next section, like right after that. Like if I'm like, I don't know if this is working for this moment here where they are um these two characters are fighting. I don't think I have the rhythm of their action right. So let me go on to the next bit, because right after they're fighting, it cuts to the prince and he's fighting someone else, and I'll start working on that and have a good idea. And I think sometimes, like I remember somebody once said to me, "There's no such thing as writer's block." And I was like, like, what do you mean? And he was like, there's just no such thing as writer's block. Like there's only like you just stop writing. So if you
Mhm.
just keep writing, you will you, your natural ability and inclination to create will kick in. So if you're stuck on a certain bit, just go to the next bit, and then you'll be inspired. And when you go back to that bit you were stuck on, like you'll have, like, I don't know, wiped away the cobwebs in your brain. And that's what I do, is like I just try to say one note at a time.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just go, and if the beauty about writing music and about writing in general is like if you just don't let the writer's block stop you. If you just keep going, then at least at the very least, which is still helpful, you'll know what doesn't work.
Yeah.
So if you write something that's shit, then you know, okay, well, at least it's shit and I know why it's bad. So maybe now I have a better idea of what might be better
Yeah.
because I know that this is bad for this reason, if that makes sense.
No, that totally makes
Yeah.
sense. How long would you say your entire score for this film is from start to finish altogether?
I don't know. I think the calculation was like 93 or 97 minutes or something like that. It's pretty long. And the movie is like maybe 10 something minutes longer than that.
Mhm.
So maybe 14 minutes longer than the score itself. It's by far to date the most minutes of music I've ever written for a picture.
Oh, that is so cool though.
Yeah, it's just wall to wall because it was just the pacing of it is so good. It's just like action, 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 maybe a little bit of joke, and then we're cut to the queen, and she's in the castle, and she's doing something crazy, and she's making the poisonous apple, and then it builds and builds, and then we're back with the dwarfs, and then they're doing something, and it was just like I'd be curious to see what you thought, but it just has such a good pacing that it just felt like the music just keeps driving us through the story, and
Yeah.
it always just felt natural to keep it going and be part of telling the story.
Well, and you know what else really helped as well? I thought the pacing was perfect, but I also was really invested in all of the characters because there are other movies out there where you go from, what the evil queen's doing, and then you go to what the prince is doing, and you're like, oh, I don't care about this character. I want to get back to this character storyline. But with the death of Snow White, I felt invested and interested, and I was curious to see what all the characters were up to. So it was really nice going between the different characters and their storylines. I thought that was really nicely done.
Yeah, I think that's a testimony to Jason and Naomi who wrote
Mhm.
this film together. And I think it's really fun. Like it's kind of a Game of Thrones um or Star Wars type thing to bounce back and forth between your main characters and then eventually like these two storylines like merge and become one storyline like the prince and the dwarves come together and they're
Mhm.
now working together and it's a really fun way to tell a story and I think they really pulled it off.
I'm always curious when talking about, fairy tale characters that people have grown up with, whether it's Winnie the Pooh or Snow White. What was your relationship like with the story and the characters of Snow White growing up?
I have, I outside of knowing that outside of knowing that it was like the first Disney, growing up, outside of knowing that it was the first Disney movie, like I never watched Snow White. It wasn't one that I connected with. I didn't really connect with like a lot of the early Disney pictures, like Snow White or Sleeping Beauty or Sword in the Stone, um, for whatever reason. I mean, I grew up in the '90s and that was kind of like the Disney Renaissance, like the second, rise of Disney. So I watched like Aladdin, Lion King, Little Mermaid, Sleeping Beauty, or
Beauty and the
Beauty and the
Beast.
Beast,
Hmm.
yeah, and so that was kind of my era of Disney, and I would reach back a little bit like Rescuers. But I think that's because in the '90s they had the sequel come out, like Rescuers Down Under. So
Oh,
then I
right.
watched the Rescuers, which was I think in the from the '80s. Um, the great, I mean, but what I'm saying is I didn't really watch a lot of like the old
Yeah,
Disney. But now that I work in film and certainly like I said earlier, my major was in composition and orchestration and music theory. Um, but I had a minor in film studies. So I'm obviously going to school and minoring in film studies. Like you are aware of the significance
right.
of what they achieved in that picture, even if it's not like the most complex story. Like the original animation from Disney is not the most complex of stories. It was revolutionary for its time. So I don't really have any personal connection to it other than recognizing it as like, just being this incredible feat of a 90-minute animation. Nobody had ever
Right.
animated something that long before.
Mhm.
It seemed impossible to people, I'm sure, because they were animating things that were a couple of minutes. That you know what I mean, like that would play before you watched a movie.
Yeah.
Um, but so yeah, I don't really have much of a connection to Snow White, so I wasn't, similarly with Winnie the Pooh, like you just kind of make sure that you step away from Disney's version of that character is
Nice.
Disney's version of that character. What I did on this picture, just like I did on Snow White, was I went and I read the original public domain version of the story and kind of drew as much as I could from that because even though the Winnie the Pooh books that came public domain, there's a lot in them. They're not long, but they're not short. The Brothers Grimm story for Snow White is like 2 pages. Like it's really short. So there's not a lot to glean from it outside of that it's gross and grotesque and the evil queen like really is trying to harvest Snow White's organs. So I like that they use that in the movie because I've never seen that in a Snow White adaptation. That she's trying to eat her organs to stay young, or to be the fairest. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't really have much of a connection to. I certainly have a connection to it now,
Yeah.
but I have a connection to this version of Snow White.
Is there a fairy tale out there that you haven't done a score for that you're like, oh, if you got to say in what the next fairy tale you got to score was, that's the one you would want to do?
I've been saying this. I've been thinking about this for a while because when I was in undergrad, um, I was in dormitory apartments, um, enjoying libations, if you will, a little bit elevated, if you will. And I came out of my room, and in the living room, my roommates were watching um, the Hills Have Eyes remake from like 2005 or something, I think, right? 2005,
Yeah, something
2006.
about that.
They were watching that, and I didn't know what they were watching. They didn't tell me. I just came out, and I was, like I said, elevated. I don't know what I can say on YouTube, but I was gardening,
Mhm.
if you know what I mean. And so I was like, "What are you guys watching?" And it was this guy with a top hat running through a can, or no, it was this young girl in a red like hoodie. And she was like running through a
Oh,
canyon, and then like a little bit of blood dripped on the ground, and she like looked up, and then it was this guy in a top hat with like kind of like a pointy nose. Like it was definitely a deformed face. I mean, now that I've seen the movie that I didn't know that they were watching, I had now I've since seen it. I know that all the family is all deformed, but to me it looked like he had kind of a pointy nose and a top hat and like a suit jacket on or something, and he was like eating I think a human leg, and he just like laughs. He's just like, oh, and he just like laughs at the girl, and she runs away. And I was like, what is this? Is this Little Red Riding Hood? I thought it was Little Red Riding Hood. Um, so that's my answer. Is I would love a really like Guillermo del Toro twisted version of Little Red Riding Hood. I think that would be really fun. There's so much opportunity, and the real idea I had there is that instead of it being a feature, maybe there's like 3 30-minute short films of
mm,
like Little Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, maybe, like some of these really gross, like really twisted ones that
yeah.
you could make real good short horror stories out and then release an anthology of like 3 30-minute fairy tales. And I
Oh,
think I've always been like, that would be a dream because
well,
those
I
are
love that
really, some
idea.
of those are really gross.
Oh my God. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. I would love to hear you score that.
Thank you.
But Andrew, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your day to be here and talk all things The Death of Snow White with me. Everybody, I'm telling you right now, check this out. Support indie horror. It'll be in theaters April 18th. Andrew, where would be a good place for people to follow you and keep up with, any other upcoming projects that you have?
Yeah, I think on social media, all of my handles are the same. It's at Andrew Scott Bell. So if you are active on Twitter, you can find me at Andrew Scott Bell. If you're active on Instagram, it's the same thing at Andrew Scott Bell. And same with TikTok, it's at Andrew Scott Bell. Excuse me.
Perfect. I'll make sure to put a link in the
And
description of this.
and I will say, the movie comes out April 18th. I think the soundtrack should come out April 11th, which is
Ooh,
one
okay.
week before the movie comes out.
Nice.
I don't put any spoilers in the titles normally. Like some people have said that it's a spoiler, but like I try, not to put spoilers in titles. But if you're
Yeah.
one of those people who don't want, then you can just wait until you see the picture to listen. But I like putting the soundtrack out a week before as part of the promotion for a film. People can use it in on Instagram stories and on social media and reels and when they
Mhm.
post about the movie because the soundtrack is released a week ahead of time. So it's likely that the soundtrack will come out April 11th on all music streaming platforms.
Oh, perfect. Yay, I can't wait. That'll be fun to have on when I'm at home. Well, thank you so much, Andrew, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Taylor. It's so good to see you, man.
Thanks. Good to see you too.
All
Bye.
right. Bye.